Hi Philip, thanks for the footage. Before I go into what I'd like you to do with your swing going forward, I just thought I'd give you a quick overview in regards to your challenges that you've been facing over the years in regards to inconsistencies, two-way misses, the early extension that you mentioned, etc., etc. So I've popped some lines and arrows and dots on the screen here, so don't panic too much. I'm going to walk you through each one and how relevant it is as we go. Just before we do this, the orange line here on the right and the box that your head's going to be in is going to be in at the top of your backswing onwards. There's a little bit of camera wobble in this down the line footage, so some of these angles will change and become more appropriate as we progress with your swing. So I've matched these two swings up, and I'm just going to walk you through it from some key positions. At setup, I would like to see ultimately both feet turned out more. Turning the feet out more repositions the knees, which then allows the hips and the pelvis to rotate more freely, which gives the shoulders more freedom of movement, which requires less use of the arms. And that's going to all become apparent when we start to look at your golf swing in motion. So certainly would want to see both feet turned out more from the face-on view. And when I do get the model swings up to compare this, you'll appreciate a little bit more. Generally speaking, we would like to see both feet turned out a minimum of 20 degrees. I would work on 30 degrees as a baseline. As you do that, you're not going to have this right knee looking quite as kinked in as it is. So as you reposition the feet, you also reposition the knees, which then frees up the pelvis to rotate during the backswing, freeing up the torso, reducing the sort of necessity to lift the arms and therefore impact on your wrist conditions, which is a big issue for you when we start looking at your overall swing. So I'll just get rid of a few of those. Okay, so first move away, pretty good. Maintain your stability. You can see now your head's just going into that little orange box that I've put there on the right hand screen. Work the hands in nicely, keep the club out in front of the hands, which is good. The plane lines that we use within the system are the red line and the yellow line through the hand plane and then onto the elbow plane. The reason we do that is it gives the player a nice blend between creating enough depth to give them power and creating an angle into the ball that's direct enough to allow for a degree of accuracy as well. So we're trying to get the players that we work with to hit the ball as far as they can, as straight as they can, as often as they can. And that obviously that varies from player to player, but that's the principle behind the system. So working the hands in nicely, you can see the hands working up the red line, which is great. You're already seeing some of the work that you've been doing getting in there. That lead shoulder works down nicely. So that red dot I've put on face on, lead shoulder, that's the center of your arc. Works nicely down and across, turning the shoulders on a tilted angle. Now ideally during the pattern we'd have the hands tracing the red line, tracing hand plane, up to P2, which is when the shaft's parallel with the ground. Now to keep the left arm moving, the right arm now has to start to bend. Now in your case, it flexes a little bit too much, and you see the hands, rather than gradually elevating onto the yellow line at the top of the backswing down the line, they elevate well above the yellow line. So the butt of your golf club at the top of your backswing is almost sort of directly over your right shoulder. Now the problem with that is that means that this elbow has worked internally, this shoulder has worked internally, and the impact that has now is it's added some extension to this wrist. So you start to get a little bit of cupping in your wrist, and you can see here that your wrists are quite active when you take the club back. The issue we've got here, Philip, is that the more you hinge the wrists, the more you're opening the face to the path of the golf club or the arc of the golf club throughout the swing. So the more wrist action we have, the less consistent our face to path relationship is going to be. And that doesn't mean that you can't find examples of players throughout the years who've been very wristy. There certainly have been. But if we're working with a player who's got a history of being inconsistent, may have a limited amount of practice time due to work or family commitments. The last thing we want is to introduce a complex movement that's going to require a lot of timing, and if it doesn't get timed correctly, can start to produce a lot of missed shots. So ideally at the top of your backswing, I would like to see going forward the butt of the club being more on this line, which would mean that this elbow is a little bit more externally rotated. Something that you picked up on if you're following golf online, which you obviously are. External rotation of this elbow and shoulder are sort of buzzwords at the minute, but if we had the butt of the club deeper, this external rotation that people talk about, which is an asset, would be in there at the top of your backswing, and therefore rather than trying to create it in the downswing, you would have it in there at the top, and you'd just be able to pivot back normally or neutral it and just have it in there and get the club in a more shallow position coming into the golf ball. So with that in mind, if we look at what happens now in transition, so we've already said that the arms have lifted a little bit too much. The lead wrist has cupped or extended a little bit too much, and the wrists have cocked a little bit too much. From there now, the shaft sets down the line very steep. If you look on the face-on footage, I put a purple arrow on your trail shoulder at setup. By the time you get halfway down, look how much higher your trail shoulder is. Your trail shoulder just about gets back to where it was at address by the time you're hitting the golf ball. I'd want to see that happening much sooner. When that happens, you see the two green dots from face on. That's your upper centre and your lower centre. Stay very much, the upper centre stays out in front of the lower centre. So there's not enough separation. Ideally, we'd want to see the pelvis pushing forward, and we'd want to see the upper centre maintaining its stability and maintaining its position within the centre of the stance. So you've made a nice stable backswing, and then as you transition, everything drives forward. Now, where this relates to your early extension, if we flip over to your down the line view now, as you come down at P5, left arm parallel with the ground, your club or your shaft is higher than the level of the shoulder. Now at this point within the model and within the system, we'd expect to see the shaft more mid-bicep. So you can see there's a hell of a lot of steepening going on with that shaft. It's way too high up at that point. So what you start to do now is, as a better player, as someone who's got an appreciation of where the club is and where it needs to be, you start to pull away with the chest. Now as you pull away with the chest, that's why down the line and face on, you can see the head lifting. You're so busy pulling away with the chest, you can't possibly separate the two centres, which is what we just talked about from the face on footage. And the wrist angles have got to come out very quickly. So as you pull the chest away, that's your attempt to get the club into some sort of position to hit the golf ball. If you didn't do that, the club would continue to tumble out in front of you, and you just hit massive pulls, massive cuts. As you do that, your extension, you can see your trail knee drives towards the ball, your trail foot pops up, and that's where a lot of the inconsistencies are coming in. You've got a swing that's going from steep to shallow. As you do that, the wrist angles come out very rapidly, and whenever you do that, your club face is going to be about as unstable as it could ever be. You look like a big strong guy, you've got some decent mechanics in there, so speed's not going to be an issue, but unfortunately if we're trying to time a complicated movement at speed with a very unstable club face, then we're asking for trouble. So the early extension that you said in your text you've always fought is a result of the position you see here, from sort of both down the line and face on really, but predominantly from down the line. Shaft's too steep, way too much in front of you with the hands. We want to see the hands and the arms deeper at that point. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the sort of some model swings, if you will, up from both face on and down the line. I'm going to concentrate on face on first because you've got less work to do there. Then I'm going to move to down the line. And then ultimately what I'll do is I will get some footage up of a drill that I'd like you to perform, which ticks a lot of boxes in regards to what I'd like you to work on and what you need to introduce into your swing. Okay, so when we look at you compared to Aaron Badley on the left-hand side, Aaron Badley's swing when he worked with Mike and Andy, in my opinion, is probably the nearest to what our model is that you can find on the internet, especially at this period. He was right at the top of his game. And you can see that both feet are turned out approximately 25 to 30 degrees, which means that his knees are turned out, and that in turn gives him a nice balanced look at setup. So with yourself, we see this foot, particularly the trail foot, is angled inwards, and consequently this trail knee is kinked inwards. Having said that, you do change flexing your knees nicely, again allowing for a little bit of camera wobble there, but you see that the lead shoulder works down nicely from P1 to P4, so turning on a tilted angle, and maintaining your stability throughout the backswing, as we see across here with Aaron. Lead shoulder working down, turning on a tilted angle, knees changing flex. So whilst both players will appear different, they are both carrying out the same basic moves, the same principles, etc, etc. So turning that foot out would just make things a little bit easier. I'd like to see your feet both turned out approximately 30 degrees. 25 as a minimum. That would help your leg action tremendously, freeing up your hips. Now, from there, what we see with Aaron is he's going to start to push his lower centre forward more than the upper centre goes forward. So there is a little bit of drift forward with the upper centre, but the lower centre is pushing forward. So at this point, there is a separation between the centre of his shoulder turn and the centre of his pelvis. He's pushed forward. You see the two yellow dots are where he is at P4, and he's pushed the lower centre forward, which is bringing this trail shoulder back down to where it was at P1 by the time he gets to about P6, shaft parallel to the ground. Now that has a knock-on effect from down the line that would look much shallower than what we're going to see with yourself. So in your case, you're going to push forward with the upper and lower centre. So you don't get that same separation, which is why at 5.5, your trail shoulder isn't as low and you haven't got as much side bend here. So if the lower centre push forward and the upper centre stayed fixed or stable, that would have a totally different appearance, and this trail shoulder would be in a different spot as well. Okay, so that's the face-on view. We've not got a lot to talk about there at the moment. Going forward, subsequent sessions, we might add a little bit, we will add a little bit more detail to what I want you to do in the through swing from this view. But what I want to do now is switch over to the down the line view, compare you to a model swing, and then give you the drill to work on that we're going to do moving forward. Okay, so down the line I've put Charlie Wee up here. Now Charlie Wee in this footage is an ideal model for you at this moment in time. Ticks a lot of boxes in regards to what you need to do with your golf swing. So we touched on at the start about what the ideal hand path would be. So your hand path is, and again we're allowing for a little bit of camera wobble on this, but up the red line, up hand plane, before elevating onto elbow plane, but then never getting above elbow plane. You can see there your wrist hinge really kicking in. That's affecting the face to path relationship severely, which makes things harder to manage. And then at the top of your backswing, your tendency is to get the hands very much over that trail shoulder. You can see there your club face opening up quite a lot, sort of pointing toe down more than I would prescribe, and a little bit of kink going in that lead wrist. And just 1 second there. Just change over. There we go. Right, so what we're going to see with Charlie is very, very similar from P1 to P2. Hands tracing the hand plane line. Club staying out in front of the hands a little bit, which is fine. Now, to keep the lead arm moving, the trail arm needs to flex. As it does that, it starts to elevate onto that elbow plane line. So we see at the top of the backswing, the hands are much deeper. Rather than being above the trail shoulder, they are maybe 6 to 8 inches behind the trail shoulder. and the lead wrist is much flatter. The wrists have been much less active, which means that the face to path relationship is going to be easier to manage. So like I said, you can find players who are quite wristy, but as you increase the amount of wrist hinge, you increase the chaos in the golf swing, and it becomes a higher maintenance piece of work. So you can see the difference there. Charlie's got more depth at the top of the backswing. Other than that, there's a lot of similarities. Because you've picked the club up and hinged the wrist as you start down, by the time you get left arm parallel with the ground, which is sort of when the chest starts pulling away to shallow it out, we're looking at a left arm that's angled in maybe 10 degrees, and we're looking at a shaft that's hitting the body just above the level of the shoulder. In Charlie's case, as he transitions straight down the hand plane line, at P5 you're seeing an arm that's angled in maybe 20-25 degrees, and you're seeing a shaft that's hitting the mid bicep area. So two very different positions at that point. You could argue that in transition you could shallow this shaft off, and I would agree some players do that, but then you've got to look at the mechanisms you use to shallow that shaft off, such as driving the trail leg towards the ball, raising the trail heel quickly, pulling the chest away, so you start to extend too much too soon, to shallow that club out, to put it in a position to hit the ball, which from shot to shot you'll do very well. It's a big power piece. So add to that athletic ability, stature, you can hit the ball a country mile, but it becomes very, very difficult to manage. So what we need to do is we need to add some depth to the top of the backswing so that we can be shallower and deeper at this point in the swing, so that we don't need to pull away and shallow things out very late in the downswing when we're building up a tremendous amount of speed. And that brings us to the drill that I'm going to give you to work on this. It's quite a straightforward drill. It might be quite challenging for you at first, but I'd like to just stick at it. And once you've done it for a day or two, send me a little bit of footage across via WhatsApp and let me have a little look at it just to make sure you're doing it right. And I'd like to offer you a little bit of a comparison as well. So I'll just sort of throw you a quick video comparison in. It'll be a couple of minutes long just to let you see the differences that you're making in quite a short period of time. So we've got arms deeper, hands deeper at the top. And we want to see that shaft hitting the mid bicep at P5 so that we don't have to extend as quickly through the hit, so that the wrist angles can come out more gradually, so that the club face can be more stable. Okay, so the drill I'd like you to do is what we call the bowler drill. And the way you're going to do this is I'm demonstrating here on the left-hand side of the screen. And it's ideal for anybody who's looking to get deeper at the top, keep the arms and the club in transition, and learn to prevent early extension. So I'm going to take my normal setup, and then once I'm in my normal setup, I'm going to withdraw my right foot back so that the toe end of the right foot is behind the left heel. Now what I've just done here now is I've just put my pelvis in a more turned position. I've just straightened the trail leg, so I've got that extension in there. And I've just made it much easier to get my hands and my arms deeper during the backswing. So that's almost like preset, if you will. So from there, I'm just going to make my normal backswing. It's going to be really easy to get the hands coming in. And it's going to position the club and the butt of the club and the hands much more behind this trail shoulder than we see with yourself at the top of the backswing. Now from that position, it's now harder for me to turn through the golf ball properly. But I have to turn through the golf ball properly to prevent this club being swung too far out to the right. So it's actually going to challenge you to rotate through more and extend less. So that's one of the things at the moment is you're so high at the top that there's very little rotation as you come through until after impact. The reason for that is because you're so busy extending to try and shallow out this golf club and it's attacking to the golf ball. So to hit this ball properly now on the left hand side like I'm doing the drill, I've got to learn to rotate. But as I rotate, see how the lead arm stays in and the shaft hits the mid bicep, which is what we're looking for. From there, I want you to feel like you keep your arms bolt straight as you come through the shot. So this is going to feel less wristy than normal on the way through. Normal setup, draw the right foot back. That's going to allow you to get the butt of the club much deeper at the top and then shallower and the arms in more in transition. So for the player on the right, for you to hit the ball properly, you now have to pull away and shallow things out. For me to hit the ball properly, I've got to keep the chest rotating, keep the right shoulder working down and around. So this is encouraging me, or encouraging you to do the opposite of what you would normally do. So right shoulder's got to work down and around. If I drive the trail leg at the ball, raise the right heel too quickly, pull away with the chest, there's no way I'm going to hit that golf ball. So this player is extending to shallow it. This player doesn't need to extend to shallow it because the club is much deeper and the shaft is much flatter at P5. So we want you deeper at P4 and deeper at P5. And we also want to have a slightly different setup position in regards to the positioning of the feet and just a little bit less hinging of the wrists on the way back. So I would have you working, like I said before, on this drill that I'm demonstrating here for you in a very non-wristy manner, if that makes sense. If you've got any questions about any of this, by the way, just feel free to drop me a message on WhatsApp. Right foot drawn back so that the toe end's behind the lead heel. Very, very non-wristy. And then on the way through, keep the arms bolt straight for as long as you can. Good luck with it, and I look forward to watching this one progress over the coming weeks.